All right, everyone, this is the veal deal. Today I'm making a homemade sausage from start to finish using fresh veal. Today's video is sponsored by Veal Discover Delicious, which is funded by beef farmers and ranchers. I really enjoy experimenting with veal in the kitchen because it has a very mild flavor, so you can add in all kinds of seasonings and spices to sort of jazz it up. Today I am making homemade sausage using a ground veal shoulder, and I'm making sort of a Greek-inspired sausage that has feta cheese and fresh lemon zest and oregano, and then also an Italian-inspired sausage with sun-dried tomatoes, fresh basil, and garlic. If you're new to my channel, don't forget to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Okay, let's make some homemade sausage.
So I'm actually starting by preparing the casing for the sausage. This is a natural hog casing that I bought from a local butcher. There was so much here. He told me I think I could have made 100 pounds of sausage, which just was not my goal. But this is pretty much all I could find, so I just went with it. I had defrosted it. It was coated in salt to preserve it, so I rinsed all the salt off. Then I put it in some cold water with a half a teaspoon of baking soda, which from all of my research, I learned that helps the casing go onto the sausage maker a little bit better. And then I refrigerated that overnight. Then I was gifted this beautiful veal shoulder. You can keep most of the fat on your meat. You want that fat. But if you have any really tough gristle, which I just showed, you can chop that off. You don't want anything that's going to be really rubbery or tough. You want it to be able to be broken down in your meat grinder. But any sort of regular textured fat on your meat is okay to save. And then beyond that, I was also given some veal fat to work with. So I cubed this up as well. And then the small chunks of veal shoulder and the veal fat, I put in a big container and pop that in the freezer, because when you're working with your meat, you want it to be really cold, if not partially frozen, not completely solid, but just very, very cold, because that's going to help the meat grinder work most effectively. And this will also prevent the fat from smearing. Now, in addition to chilling the meat, my mixing bowl that was catching the ground veal and all of my machine parts for the meat grinder were also chilled. So I tried my best to do an 80% lean, 20% fat combination, but I was just guesstimating because I didn't have my kitchen scale with me at the time. But ultimately, I think I would recommend a 70 to 30% ratio, particularly with the veal because it's quite lean. And this combination of meat to fat will result in a nice, juicy sausage.
It's working! I can't believe it's making sausage. This is amazing.
I used a wooden spoon to scrape any excess meat off of the grinding plate because that can be a little sharp. And then this is the ground veal. So phase one is complete. Next, I'm adding the flavorings to the ground veal. For my first Greek-inspired sausage, I'm using salt, lemon zest, oregano, and some pepper, some feta cheese, and a mixture of water and white wine vinegar, and a touch of lemon juice too. And I'm adding that all into the bowl of my stand mixer. And you can see that I swapped out my meat grinding attachment for the paddle. And you only want to mix this together for about a minute at most on the lowest setting. I accidentally went a little too high with my speed, which creates a little bit of friction and heat. So the fat in this one did start to smear against the edges of the bowl, which you will see. But for the next flavor, it worked out a lot better. So once this is all incorporated, it's going to have a slightly sticky texture, and it should actually be able to stick to your hand a little bit. This was also an indicator to me. Mine wasn't super sticky, so I knew that I needed a little bit more fat the next time I tried this. But overall, this works really well for incorporating all of these seasonings and extra ingredients evenly without jamming up the meat grinder by adding them in when you're actually grinding the meat. For the Italian flavored sausage, I used fresh basil that I had chopped up, some small bits of sun-dried tomatoes. I used salt and pepper for this one crushed clove of garlic, and then the liquid in this was some water and some red wine vinegar. And you will notice on this batch that there's no fat smeared against the side of the bowl and everything incorporated together really nicely. Next, I attached my sausage stuffer tube and put a little bit of olive oil on it just so the casing could slide on as easily as possible. And then I used a few feet of the natural hog casing and slid it on carefully. Before I tied it off, though, I did press my seasoned meat mixture, which again was very cold, into the feeding tube here, for lack of a better term. But basically, you want to get any air out So let the air release out the end of the stuffer tube and then tie off your casing. There was a little bit of trial and error happening here, but we figured that out. And then I used my hands to guide the sausage out. Really, the meat sort of pushed the casing off of the tube. Anyway, I didn't have to do too much here. But my husband was using his hands to stuff the meat into the machine because you want to be constantly pushing it down and refilling it and pushing it down so that the meat is coming out evenly.
So I think for my very first time ever making sausage, this came out really great. We're finding that we need to sort of press the meat down a little bit to get rid of some of the air. I think that's just a little bit of a learning curve to figure out how to not have air. It smells amazing. This is the sun-dried tomato and fresh basil from my mom's garden and garlic. And now I'm gonna form this one into links.
I used my thumb and pointer finger to pinch the meat in the length that I wanted the link to be, and then I spun it around a few times away from me, and then for the next link, I pinched it and spun it towards me. So you're always going in opposite directions. So these are the Italian sausage links that I think look really good. And then these are the Greek-inspired sausages. My mom has these corn holders because I don't have a formal sausage pricker, but this worked perfectly, and you just poke a few holes in each sausage link, and immediately the air bubbles inside release, and the casing kind of adheres onto that sausage link a little bit better. And then I set these in the fridge for a few hours so the flavors could marry together before grilling them. These sausages had great flavor and a good texture. As I mentioned before, next time I make these, I'd like to add a little bit more fat so that they're even juicier, but they cut very cleanly. They didn't crumble everywhere. I was very proud of these. So this was the Italian one that was really tasty. The Greek one, I think you could bump up the lemon zest and the oregano for even more of a flavorful punch. But all of the sausages were delicious, and my family really enjoyed trying them. And I hope this inspires you to try something new in your kitchen.
Thank you so much again to Veal Discover Delicious, funded by Beef Farmers and Ranchers, for sponsoring today's video. And thank you so much for joining me here today, and I'll see you again soon.